Our warm-up today is writing whole numbers in expanded form. So if you would, go ahead and pause your video, number your paper or board from 1 to 4, and see if you can't go ahead and write these numbers in expanded form. So number 1, we could write 300 plus 10 plus 7 in expanded form. Let's take a look at number 2. Our number was 1,956, so we could write 1,000 plus 900 plus 50 plus 6. Let's take a look at number 3. We have 2017. Now, what would happen if I wrote my expanded form like this? Can't quite fit everything that I'd like there. Would this work? Would this give me 2,117? Pause your video and see if you can figure it out. Does it equal the same number? It does. It does. Okay, so let's take a look at number 4. We have 10,941. And I'm going to go back to our original way of doing it. 10,000 plus 900 plus 40 plus 1. And there you have it, expanded form. Our math message today is located on page 118 in your student math journal. So we want SMJ 118. And if you take a look at that page, it tells you to shade the grid to represent 0 and 3/10. Add shading to the grid in another color so that the grid shows 0 and 31/100 in all. Then use a third color to add shading so that the grid shows 0 and 312/1000. So you might want to pause your video, get whatever colors that you're going to use, and shade that grid and come right back. Okay, so I've taken my first color and I have shaded 3/10. So I've got 1, 2, 3/10. And next we will select a different color to show the 1/100th. And here I've shaded 1 whole square there to represent the 100th. And then we need to select a third color to show the 2,000ths. And this is going to be really hard to do with those tiny little squares, but we need to shade 2 of those. And there you have it. Another representation of the decimal 0 and 312,000ths. How'd you do? Welcome to representing decimals in expanded form. So the purpose of our lesson today is to extend your understanding of expanded form to decimals. And you'll see here that I have a grid. I have a decimal to the left, and I have written it in expanded form. So we're going to talk about these right now. So our decimal is 0 and 439,000ths. So if we look at the first place to the right, which is our tenths place, it's the number 4. We come over here to the grid, and I have shaded in 1, 2, 3, 4 columns to represent that 4/10. Then we're going to move to the 3, which is in the hundredths column. And the number is 3, so we're going to come over here and we're going to shade 3 squares to represent the 3/100ths. Then we're going to come back over here. We have a 9 in the thousandths place. We're going to shade those teeny tiny little rectangles there, 9 of them, to represent that thousandths. So if we were going to write this decimal in expanded form, as we do with whole numbers, we're going to take it apart. So we're going to look at the 4. The 4 is worth 4/10. So down here in my equation for my expanded form, I'm going to write 0 and 4/10. Now notice where the 4 is, where the decimal point is. Then we're going to come back up here. We're going to look at the next digit was a 3 in the hundredths place. Notice how we write it. This is 0 and 3/100ths. Make sure that you've got that 0 here and your 3 is in that hundredths place, because if you had it here, that would be 3/10, not hundredths. Then we're going to move to the 9. The 9 is in the thousandths place. So as we look down here in our equation, we have 2 zeros and then our 9, showing that that 9 is in the thousands place. So basically with decimals in expanded form, you're going to take apart the number just like you would if it were a whole number. So let's take a look at some different ways to write in expanded form. So you'll notice on the left we have an example of 0 and 568 thousandths. We've got 3 columns here of different versions of expanded form. The first one is the sum of decimals in standard notation, which is what I just showed you just a couple of minutes ago. So if we take this decimal apart, we have 0 and 5/10 because it's in the tenths place, plus 0 and 6/100ths because our 6 is in the hundredths place. And then we're going to add the 8 thousandths to that. So this is the first way. The second way is the sum of multiplication expressions. So let's look here. 5 times 0 and 1/10. So if we multiplied that out, it would equal 0 and 5/10 is what we have over here. We're going to add that to 6 times 1/100th, which of course is going to give us 6/100ths like we have in the original decimal. And then we're going to take 8 times 1,000th. And again, that's going to give us our 8 in the thousandths place in the original decimal. So this is another version of how to write expanded form for that particular decimal. Our third option is the sum of multiplication expressions fractions. So this time we're going to change our decimal to a fraction. So back here we had 5/10. So we're going to take 5 times 1/10, which would give us 5/10. And for the hundredth spot, we've got 6. So 6 times 1/100th, which will give us 6/100ths, plus 8 times 1,000th, which of course is going to give us 8 in that thousandths place. So you're going to do some practicing taking different decimals just like I've done here with these 3 examples. And you are going to try to write them in the various forms of expanded form. So let's take a look at one of the activities that we could do. we could take a deck of cards and pull out 3 cards. So I've got a 7, a 3, and a 2 here. Now we're going to make a decimal with those 3 cards. So I would write that in my place value chart, and I can put them in any order that I want. So I could make 732 thousandths, or I could write it in a different way. I could change those numbers around and maybe do this. But for our example, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to use the 0 and 732 thousandths. So off to the left here, our decimal, we're going to write up here. We're going to write that decimal in expanded form. So think about which method do you want to use. And you would write that above. So we would have 0 and 7/10 plus 0 and 3/100 plus 0 and 2/1000 would be one way that we could write that. And of course we could use the fraction method or the multiplication in parentheses that we were using just a few minutes ago. So next what you would do is shade your grid. So you're going to go through and shade 7/10. So that means we would have 7 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we would shade all of that in. And then we're going to move over to our 3, which is in the hundredths place. We're going to change colors, and we're going to fill in 3 of those to represent our hundredths place. And then we have a 2, which means that we're going to shade 1 tiny rectangle and 1 tiny rectangle. And there you have it. Our representation of 0 and 732 thousandths. We've written it in expanded form, and we have shaded in our grid to represent those values. So let's go ahead and try another example. This time I have drawn 3 cards, and they are 4, 2, and 5. And you can, again, put them in any order when you do this. Let's say that we do 254 thousandths. So we're then going to take that number and write it up here to show what decimal that we chose. And then we're going to write it in expanded form. So let's try a different way of writing that in expanded form this time. Let's do 2 times 1/10 plus 5 times 1/100th plus 4 times 1,000th. And there you have it, another way to write that decimal in expanded form. And then we're going to go ahead and shade our grid. So to start with, we're going to look at that first digit, which is the 2, which means that we're going to shade 2 columns because it's the tenths place. And then we're going to move over to the 5, and that is in the hundredths place. So we will shade 5 boxes here, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, just double checking that I'm counting correctly. Looks like I went a little too high there. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. All right, and then we're going to move to that thousandths place, and we have a 4. So we're going to very carefully color 4 of those teeny tiny little rectangles. And there you have it. We've represented that decimal in standard form, expanded form, and using our grid. So let's summarize what we've done today and hopefully what you can now do. We can write decimals in expanded form just like we can decompose whole numbers to write those numbers in expanded form. And hopefully you've learned that there are many different ways that we can write decimals in expanded form. This might take some practice, but I know you can do it. Until next time.